George Lucas is often criticized for attempting to ruin Han Solo's character, or at least ruin an aspect of it. Why? Because in the special edition of A New Hope, he re-edited the confrontation between Han Solo and Greedo, so that Greedo shot first instead of Han. For many fans, including His Imperial Majesty, this was seen as undermining an integral part of Han's character, that part being the fact that he is described as a scoundrel, and is supposed to be a scallywag of a smuggler. Now, I personally believe George Lucas deserved to be criticised for this edit. However, what George Lucas did was well intentioned. George Lucas thought that with this edit, he would make New Hope a better film. So, no matter how vehemently I oppose the decision, I have to admit that he made the change with pure intentions. I am unsure whether Steven Spielberg's intentions are pure here, however. Yes, you read the headline correctly. Spielberg is considering making an Indiana Jones film where Indiana Jones is a woman. If this looks and sounds familiar, it's probably because a similar idea was adopted and executed for Ghostbusters 2016, otherwise known as Ghostbusters Answer the Call, and Ocean's 8. That idea, of course, being, why don't we take films which have had predominantly male casts and have appealed primarily to men, remake these films, and change the characters to be predominantly women? This is a rather silly idea, and I shall explain why. Imagine someone taking such an approach with a film that has a cast consisting primarily of females, and which appeals mainly to women, and then remaking said film with a predominantly male cast. Imagine doing this with the Princess Diaries films, or with Mean Girls, for instance. That is how ridiculous this idea is. But if you think that this habit of progressives, rebooting franchises, is limited to changing casts from male to female, you would be wrong. If you live in Great Britain, you have no doubt heard some ideas revolving around the casting of James Bond, when Daniel Craig finally finishes his stint acting as the much beloved fictional spy. Currently, there are two progressive ideas concerning who should play the next iteration of 007. The most popular of these is the one where an African actor would play James Bond. No, I am not joking. Some people in the media industry think it would be a good idea to cast an African actor to play an English character, a character who has always been English in both the books and the films. I can hear Ian Fleming rolling in his grave. The second idea is, of course, to cast a woman as 007 and have a Jane Bond rather than a James Bond. Both of these ideas are insulting to the James Bond franchise, and would put off many people from seeing the next James Bond film. Now, this is all terrible, but it begs the question, why are producers and directors doing this with established franchises? It can't be because such progressive recreations, or to be more critical, distortions, of established characters and intellectual properties produce financial success for film companies. Ghostbusters 2016 was a box office failure and did not make a profit, and thus there was no guarantee that Ocean's 8, following a similar concept, would be a success either. Supposedly, Hollywood producers don't take many risks, because they are rather keen on making bags of money, and this is the given reason as to why we don't see more original films from Hollywood and are stuck with soft reboots and sequels. Now, the obvious answer is, maybe producers don't actually care about profit anymore, and are more interested in pushing a progressive agenda. But this raises another question. Why not make new films with progressive messages? Many people have responded to the idea of a female Indiana Jones with statements along these lines. We already have a female Indiana Jones. She's called Lara Croft. And many people are actually open to the idea of action heroines as long as they are original creations and not converted male to female characters. Considering that there is nothing controversial about making new characters, why aren't producers and writers doing this? Why are they adopting the unsuccessful and very unpopular Ghostbusters 2016 approach? Please allow me to go off on a tangent to talk about Ready Player One, and two articles written on it by The Guardian. Now, Ready Player One is a very politically correct feature. I couldn't see anything controversial or anti-progressive in it. However, Guardian writers Monica Castiello and Alfie Bonn still find ways to explain how Ready Player One isn't politically correct enough and needs to be more progressive. In her review of the film, Monica Castiello says, "Unfortunately, Ready Player One has a noticeable girl problem. It can't see female characters as just other people. For as skilled and resourceful as Artemis Samantha Olivia Cook is, her avatar is that of an impossible pixie dream girl, a creature with a svelte body, anime-inspired big eyes, weapons training, and the person who knows and loves almost every reference Wade makes. Of course, she has a birthmark on her face, and he's the only nice guy who can see that she's truly beautiful. Samantha is the artificially programmed Eve to Wade's Adam, but worse, because she never gets the chance to sin." Alfie Bond says this about the film in his opinion piece. "In this way, it does justice to the importance of video games, which have an increasing role in social and cultural life. On the other hand, it's fraught with gender problems, reverence for elitism, and a right-wing endorsement of the importance of culture over political and economic conditions. As such, the celebrated director is showing the worst side of gamer culture." Later on in his article, Alfie Bond says this: "For one thing, Spielberg's movie significantly amplifies the already dangerous girl problem of Klein's book. The story's Oasis is an online avatar space combining large-scale, multiplayer, online gaming with social media. The film offers two ways of understanding the appeal of this dreamlike reality. The male protagonist, Wade Owen Watts, known as Pasviel in Oasis, thinks the space is liberating because we exist as raw personality in here, whereas the female character, Samantha Evelyn Cook, Artemis, disagrees, saying everything about her online personas is filtered, which allows us to control how we look and sound to others. The Oasis lets you be who you want to be. That's why everyone is so addicted to it. The male gets to feel free, while the female has to respond to the male gaze." As you can see, these journalists are using ideological frameworks to rationalize why Ready Player One is a problematic film and isn't progressive enough. Now I can hear you all saying, "Well, Your Imperial Majesty, this is very interesting, but how does this link back to the question at the beginning of this video?" To demonstrate why I'm talking about Ready Player One, I want to show one more quote by Alfie Bonn in his opinion article on the film. "Far-right 4chan boards and Reddit threads have long pronounced this logic to support their approach, even misusing the left-wing philosopher Antonio Gramsci, who argued that political and economic change could be brought about via culture wars. Spielberg's film, then, while presenting itself as a progressive rebellion tale, replicates the logic of the political right today." Here, Alfie Bonn reveals his ideological position and lens by which he views art and media creations, by mentioning the neo-Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci. I had the very informative and in some ways very painful experience of taking a course in media studies, not at university level, but nevertheless at a level where you learn interesting things. My tutors and teachers were essentially Marxists and intersectional feminists to the bone, and it was in this class that I realized why people have accused the education system of brainwashing students to left-wing thinking in Great Britain. In one session, Antonio Gramsci was the center of the discussion, and in particular his theory of cultural hegemony. The basics of this theory are surprisingly easy to understand. Basically, Karl Marx believed culture, social mores, social values, and the arts of any society, what he called the superstructure, were based upon the modes and means of production in a society, what he called the economic base. In other words, the economic base determines and supports the superstructure of a country. Economics determine culture. Karl Marx believed that the current superstructure was a bad thing, because it was capitalist, and he saw capitalism as a way of exploiting the working classes for their labor. He believed, however, that at some point in the future, the working classes of Europe, what he called the proletariat, would gain what he called class consciousness. They would wake up one day and realize they were being exploited for their labor by the ruling class, the capitalist factory owners, otherwise called the bourgeoisie by Karl Marx. The proletariat would then, in anger, overthrow the bourgeoisie, and a state of communism would be ushered in. Obviously, Karl Marx was wrong. Communism has not come about, and he would not recognize the communism of Stalin or Mao. It wouldn't be real communism to Karl Marx. After his death, some readers of Marx could also see that his predictions weren't coming true, but they did like his ideas. One of these individuals was an Italian called Antonio Gramsci, who suggested that the superstructure might not just exist because of the economic base, but could also exist to keep the economic base intact. In Gramsci's view, the ruling classes were the ones who largely determined the substance of the superstructure, and held what he called hegemony, or cultural hegemony. In this context, cultural hegemony refers to when one class of people dominates others by use of culture and cultural institutions, such as traditions, schools, the media, the arts, and religion. In Gramsci's view, the proletariat spontaneously gaining class consciousness was unrealistic, considering the bourgeoisie's cultural domination over society. Therefore, a more active approach was necessary to ensure that the working classes realized their supposed oppression. This active approach would involve the working classes creating their own hegemony designed to accommodate and provide for their needs, and then replacing the ruling class's hegemony with it. In other words, a culture war would have to take place so that the ruling class culture could be replaced. Fast forward to today, and most progressives and people on the left do not talk about economic or social class, but they do talk about social and ethnic groups, particularly those which they believe to be oppressed, or those ones which they believe to be oppressing others. Nevertheless, I hand it to you that progressives still, by and large, agree with Gramsci's views on hegemony. Thus, there is no longer a cultural battle between the workers and the factory owners, but instead between the oppressed and the oppressors, such as women, the oppressed, and men, the oppressors. So, how does this explain what went on with Ghostbusters 2016, Ocean's 8, and potentially Indiana Jones and James Bond? Simply put, this is an attempt to wipe away all traces of the current culture. Because many artistic and cultural works of the 20th century were primarily created by white men, who are, by the logic of progressives, evil oppressors, their cultural creations were therefore constructed with either the subconscious or deliberate intention of maintaining a hegemony, where white men oppressed anyone who was not a white man. Therefore, it is an oppressive hegemony, which has to be replaced and removed for social justice. Currently, progressives do not have the power in any of the Western countries to ban films like Indiana Jones, and this presents a problem. How can the oppressed create a cultural hegemony centered around social justice when the works of the oppressors are still much beloved by the masses? There can, after all, only be one hegemony. The solution? Recreate these oppressive works into progressive works. In this way, the franchises of the oppressors are turned against them and used to support progressive causes. It is also helpful because it can work to remove the memory of the original works and thus the original hegemony. When you ask today if a person has seen Ghostbusters, the individual has to ask for clarification as to which Ghostbusters you are referring, the original or the 2016 one. Thinking about this, it makes perfect sense why professionals at Lucasfilm have said that they are making Star Wars for a new generation, even though the original trilogy has not had any difficulties finding fans in each new generation. What they may mean is actually, we are creating Star Wars films that support a new hegemony, which we will use to change the cultures of the Western world. So, I feel that it is safe to say that the reinvention of these older, much enjoyed films has nothing to do with a desire to rake in money, but instead to change what is seen as an evil and anti progressive culture. The creators in the film industry are in culture warrior mode, and they will not stop until they have achieved their perfect hegemony. Now, I'd like to address any artists watching this. If you are against this, I have a suggestion. Let's fight fire with fire. Create music, stories, films, songs, drawings, paintings, animation, games, and whatever else in opposition to what the established artists of this world are doing. I know that some of you may not want to do this, specifically because you do not want to create politically motivated works of art, or pieces which contain political statements. But I have good news for you. You do not have to. When I watched Ready Player One, my impression was that Steven Spielberg was trying to make a film which would appeal to everyone and entertain. I do not think he was trying to make any overt political statements. In spite of the fact Ready Player One was uncontroversial, Progressives such as Monica Castiello and Alfie Bonn still found reasons to attack it. You can focus on writing the best story or creating the best work of art you possibly can, and still fight back against these people without making any political statements. And in truth, what other option is there? These Hollywood filmmakers are not interested in providing us with tales to thrill and entertain. They just want to condition us to accept their ideas for a better society, and they are not even bothering to put forward compelling arguments. I believe we are going to have to look to ourselves to create the stories we want to hear and the art we want to see. And I would like to stress that this is not a time of despair. Instead, this is a time of great opportunity for unknown artists to satiate the hunger for good art in our societies. I suggest we take this opportunity and do so with a brazen attitude filled with conviction and fearlessness. The Hollywood producers aren't apologizing, so we shouldn't either.